On the evening of Thursday, June 28, 2007, a 34-year-old woman in Grand Junction, Colorado, left her 3 children with the live-in nanny, told them she would be home later that night, and drove off to an appointment. She was carrying 2 cell phones. One of them was the phone that the mothers at her kids' activities had, the phone her family called, the phone that belonged to Paige Birgfeld, who sold Pampered Chef products and ran preschool dance classes, and was, by every account of the people who loved her, a devoted and slightly overscheduled single mom. The other phone almost no one in her life knew existed. It was the business line for a discreet escort service called Models Incorporated, and the woman who answered it went by the name Carrie. At around 9 o'clock that night, the second phone received its last call. After that, both phones went silent, and Paige Birgfeld did not come home. 2 days later, her 8-year-old daughter would walk into the Mesa County Sheriff's Office with the nanny to report her own mother missing. 4 days after that, Paige's red Ford Focus would be found burning in a parking lot 2 miles from her house, and it would take 5 years to find her body, and nearly 9 to convict the man who took her, in part because the second phone, the Carrie phone, had put more than 60 men's names in front of investigators, any one of whom might have been the last person she called. Today we are going to look at the woman behind both of those phones, at why the life she kept hidden nearly let her killer walk free, and at the one man on that list whose own hidden history made him different from all the others. Take a second to like this video, and in the comments, tell me the time and the place you are watching from. For nearly a decade, this case was told as the story of a secret. Paige deserves to be more than a secret, so a comment with her real name in it is a small way of keeping the person, and not the headline, at the center of it. Let me tell you who she was. Paige Meredith Birgfeld was born on April 27, 1973, in Atlanta, Georgia, and grew up mostly in the Denver area, where she went to high school. She married twice. Her first marriage, to her high school boyfriend, ended in 1997, in part because he did not want children and she very much did. Her second marriage, to a businessman named Rob Dixon, brought her to Grand Junction, on Colorado's western slope, and brought her the thing she had wanted most, which was children. She had 3 of them, Jess, Taft, and Cole. By 2007, that second marriage was over too, and Paige was, for the most part, raising 3 young kids on her own. The people who knew her described someone who met that head-on. Her brother Craig called her outgoing, independent, stubborn at times, a great sister, and a terrific mom. Friends described a woman working 4 or 5 different jobs, all of which she was good at, all of which she juggled at once to keep her household running. That is the part of this case that the coverage, over the years, has had a hard time holding on to. So it is worth saying plainly at the start, this is not a story about a woman with a hidden true self. This is a story about a mother of 3 who did whatever the month required to provide for her children, and who kept one part of that work separate from everyone she loved. The world would later become fixated on that one separate part, and would treat it as the real Paige hiding underneath the fake one. It was not. It was a job. We will come to why that distinction is not just a matter of respect, but a matter of how this case actually unfolded. Paige Birgfeld ran 4 businesses. 3 of them were the kind you would list on a holiday card. She sold kitchen products for Pampered Chef. She ran a preschool movement program called Brain Dance, teaching toddlers to move to music. She had a knack, everyone agreed, for building a small enterprise out of almost nothing. The 4th business was the one almost no one knew about. In 2005, she had started an escort service she called Models Incorporated. In practice, she was very nearly its only employee, though she was skilled enough at running it that she convinced clients an entire roster of women worked there. When she took that work herself, she used the name Carrie. Years earlier, in the 1990s, she had briefly danced under the name Madison at a saloon in Denver. According to police records, it was her second husband's discovery of the escort work that drove the altercation that ended their marriage. She kept all of this walled off. Her parents did not know. Her brother did not know. Most of her friends did not know. She had built, in effect, 2 entirely separate address books, 2 separate phones, 2 separate names, and she moved between them with a discipline that kept the 2 worlds from ever touching. That discipline was, in every practical sense, a form of protection. It protected her children from a part of her working life they did not need to see. It protected her family's image of her. But it would turn out to have a cost that Paige could never have anticipated, because the same wall that kept those worlds apart also meant that when she vanished, the people who loved her did not even know which of her 2 lives to look inside. Thursday, June 28, 2007, began as an ordinary day in an overscheduled life. Paige left her 3 children in the care of her live-in nanny and went about her errands and her appointments. She had promised she would be back that evening. At some point that day, she met her first ex-husband, Ron Beigler, for a picnic. Beigler was still close to her, and he would later testify that during that meeting he begged her to give up the escort service, that he was worried about the risk of it. It was, in hindsight, a chilling thing for the last person from her ordinary life to have said to her, a warning delivered on the very day the risk he feared came true. He was, as far as investigators could ever establish, the last person from that ordinary world to see her. He was also, very early, ruled out. His cell phone records placed him hundreds of miles away when Paige disappeared, and again when her car was later set on fire. Whatever happened to Paige, Ron Beigler did not do it. Investigators cleared him almost immediately, along with her second ex-husband, Rob Dixon, whose records also placed him far from the scene. As the afternoon and evening went on, the Carrie phone was active. Paige received a number of calls to that line, the way she would on any working night. Around 9 o'clock that evening, that phone received what would turn out to be its final call, and then Paige Birgfeld stopped answering both of her phones at once. The people in her ordinary life noticed the silence but could not at first make it mean anything alarming. Her friend Carol Linderholm tried to reach her and could not, and assumed she was simply busy, the way she always was, and figured she would hear from her later. Another friend, Barbara Campbell, would put into words the thing that everyone who knew Paige understood. Paige would not be bad on her word. If she said she was coming home, she was coming home. She had said she was coming home. She did not. Friday came and went, with no word. Saturday came and went, with no word. By then, the children had gone 2 full days without hearing from their mother, and the nanny and the kids understood that this was not something Paige would do. And so it was that Paige Birgfeld's disappearance was first reported not by an adult, not by a spouse, not by a colleague, but by her 8-year-old daughter Jess, who went down to the Mesa County Sheriff's Office with the nanny to tell them that her mom had not come home. In the days before that, Jess had left voicemail after voicemail on her mother's phone, asking her to please come home. Those messages were still sitting on a phone that would never be answered again. The sheriff at the time, Stan Hilke, did not believe for a moment that Paige had left of her own accord. Everything about her life said the opposite. She was the axis 3 children turned around. She had businesses, appointments, obligations, a household that did not run without her. Women like that do not simply walk away on a Thursday night and leave 3 kids with a nanny. Paige's brother, Craig, packed up his own family in Seattle and moved them to Grand Junction, into Paige's house, to take over the care of her 3 children. He did not yet know that he would be doing it permanently. He did not yet know almost anything about what the coming weeks were going to reveal about a sister he thought he knew completely. There is a hard thing at the center of this case, and it is worth naming before we go on, because it reaches out of 2007 and into the life of nearly everyone listening. The man who took Paige Birgfeld was, to the people around him, a good guy. His boss described him as honest, hardworking, likable, good with customers, easy to talk to, quick with a joke. That was the man his coworkers knew. On paper, in the records of the Colorado court system, he was a completely different person, and the 2 versions had almost nothing to do with each other. Almost everyone has a version of this in their life. The person everyone vouches for, whose references are glowing, who is charming in exactly the way that makes you feel unreasonable for the small, quiet discomfort you cannot quite explain. Paige herself had felt that discomfort about this exact man. She had met him before through her work, and it had unsettled her, enough that on at least one occasion she asked a friend to go in her place rather than see him again. Her instinct was correct. She simply did not get the chance to act on it in time. Learning to trust that instinct, and to tell the difference between a reputation and a record, is the thing I wrote my book to teach. It is called Inside the Criminal Mind, and it comes out of 23 years spent watching the gap between who a person is on paper and who they are in a room. The book walks through the specific pattern of the person whose easy charm sits on top of a documented history, and why the people around him are so consistently the last to see it. And it walks through the quieter thing, the discomfort you feel and then talk yourself out of because you cannot defend it with facts. Most people are taught to override that feeling. The book teaches you when not to. The link is in the description. If it helps you take one uneasy feeling seriously instead of arguing yourself past it, it will have earned its place. Now back to what was found on Highway 50. On the night of July 1st, 2007, 3 days after Paige vanished, someone called 911 to report a car burning in an empty parking lot in Grand Junction. When the fire was out, it was Paige Birgfeld's red Ford Focus. The lot sat about 2 miles from her home, and, as would matter enormously later, it sat diagonally across the street from a recreational vehicle dealership called Bob Scott RVs. The fire had not started on its own. It had been deliberately set, and in the burned-out shell of the car was a detail that told investigators something specific about whoever had driven it last. The driver's seat had been pushed all the way back, far past where it needed to be for Paige, who was 5 feet 4 inches tall. Whoever had last sat in that seat was tall, considerably taller than Paige. Then came the trail. Several days after the car was found, a motorist driving southeast out of town on Highway 50 got a flat tire, pulled over to fix it, and found a checkbook lying on the shoulder. It was Paige. Farther along the same highway, there was a health card, then an insurance card, then more. Investigators would eventually conclude that these items had been dropped one at a time, torn out, and thrown from a moving vehicle at intervals along the road. One investigator, Whaler, described it plainly. One check torn out at a time, one card at a time, as though she was trying to leave a trail of breadcrumbs to show them where she was going. Inside the car, police found her day planner. The pages covering the days just before her disappearance had been torn out. No one can say with certainty what happened in that vehicle, but the most human reading of that trail, and the one investigators lean toward, is almost unbearable. That Paige Birgfeld, in what may have been the last minutes of her life, was calmly, deliberately feeding pieces of her identity out a car window, one at a time, hoping that somebody, someday, would follow them to her. When police gathered up the cards scattered along Highway 50 and laid them out, they were looking at 2 lives at once. Some of the cards said Pampered Chef, some said Brain Dance, and some said Models Incorporated, and carried the name Carrie. That was the moment the case split open. Detectives went into Paige's computer and her phones and found the second world, the websites, the escort business, the separate client line. And in that same moment, a missing mother case became something far more tangled, because the district attorney's read on it was immediate and blunt. Paige, he believed, had most likely been killed by one of her clients. The problem was the number of them. The Carrie phone had been in contact with a great many men. When investigators pulled the calls from the night she disappeared and worked outward, they were looking at more than 60 possible suspects, any one of whom could have been the person she was on her way to meet. Some of them had unsettling details attached. Several of the men who had called her drove white trucks, and that stuck out, because Carol Linderholm had told investigators that Paige had once had a frightening encounter involving a white truck. There was a house painter who had called Paige some 20 times the day she vanished and then left town 2 days later, though he would ultimately be cleared by a solid alibi. This is the cruel arithmetic at the heart of Paige Birgfeld's case. The wall she had built to protect her children and her family, the discipline that kept Carrie separate from Paige, did exactly what she designed it to do. And when she was taken, that same wall meant her killer did not stand alone. He stood in a crowd of 60. The very thing she had done to keep her family safe became the thing that nearly let the man who murdered her disappear into the noise. It is worth sitting for a moment with how much that crowd slowed everything down. Investigators could not simply pursue their best suspect. Every alternate name on that client list was a potential reasonable doubt that a defense attorney could one day hold up in front of a jury, which meant that each one had to be run down and eliminated before any charge could stick. The former district attorney would later describe this as one of the central complications of the entire case, that there was such a large number of alternative suspects who had to be cleared purely by virtue of what Paige did for part of her living. A killing that, in most circumstances, would have narrowed quickly to the people closest to the victim, instead fanned outward into dozens of near strangers, each of whom had to be located, interviewed, and ruled out. And the double life did one more thing. It changed how the world looked at Paige. The moment the word escort entered the coverage, a case about a missing mother of 3 became, for a large part of the audience, a case about a secret, a scandal, a woman who had been living a lie. That shift was not just unfair to her. It actively worked against the investigation, because it invited everyone, jurors included, to imagine that a woman with that many hidden clients had somehow been the author of her own danger. The people who loved Paige spent years fighting that current, trying to keep the conversation on the person rather than the profession. Before we go on to that man, A small request. If Paige's name is going to appear anywhere tonight, let it appear here, in your own words, and let it be her real one, not Carrie. Paige Birgfeld. Her 8-year-old left voicemails begging her to come home that were never answered. The least the rest of us can do is answer with her name. One by one, over a period of months, investigators worked through the men on that list and eliminated them. And as the crowd thinned, one name did not go away. Lester Ralph Jones was 56 years old in 2007. He stood 6 feet 5 inches tall. He worked as a mechanic at Bob Scott RVs, the recreational vehicle dealership that sat diagonally across the street from the parking lot where Paige's car had been left to burn. To the people at that dealership, he was the likable employee, the good worker, the man customers got along with. His record said otherwise. In January of 1999, Jones had forced a car carrying his then-wife off the road at gunpoint, pulled her into his own vehicle, and threatened to kill her. Later that same month, he was accused of kidnapping another woman and sexually assaulting her. He served 5 years in prison for first-degree assault and second-degree attempted kidnapping. The man his co-workers described as easygoing had, less than a decade earlier, done the precise thing that had now happened to Paige. He had taken a woman against her will, and there was a connection between Jones and Paige that made him different from a random name on a client list. Jones had at one point worked alongside Paige's second ex-husband. He knew who she was. When Paige encountered him through her escort work, it unsettled her precisely because he knew her real identity, and that is why on at least one occasion, she sent her friend Carol Linderholm to an appointment in her place rather than see him herself. The day before Paige disappeared, Lester Jones called her service. Building a case against him, though, was another matter, and for years it looked impossible. When police first questioned Jones in 2007, he denied knowing Paige Birgfeld at all. He denied ever using her service. Then investigators showed him his own phone records, the call logs connecting him to Paige and to her agency, and the denial collapsed. But a caught lie is not a murder charge. The single most important piece of evidence would turn out to be a cheap prepaid phone. Investigators identified a track phone, purchased at a Walmart, that had a very strange life. In its entire existence, that phone made only 5 calls. Every one of them was connected to Paige. The last call it was involved in came from Paige's own phone. Jones denied ever owning such a phone, but surveillance footage from the store showed him buying it, on the very day Paige disappeared. The prosecution could prove he had lied about the one object that tied him, by the timeline, directly to her final hours. There was more, and it was the kind of evidence that persuades investigators long before it persuades a jury. Cadaver dogs, trained to detect human remains, alerted to Paige's scent inside her burned car and again at the RV garage where Jones worked. There was a gas can near his desk that he could not explain. Inside his toolbox, police found the handwritten phone numbers of other escorts, along with a condom, Viagra, and men's wigs, and a kitchen scale made by Pampered Chef, the very company Paige sold for. And there was the seat, pushed back to accommodate a very tall man in a car that had belonged to a woman 5 feet 4 inches tall. The Chief Deputy District Attorney, Dan Rubenstein, and the investigators around him became certain that Lester Jones had killed Paige Birgfeld. But certainty is not proof. The case was entirely circumstantial. There was no confession, no weapon, no eyewitness, and there was no body. Rubenstein said it directly. They had always known they could not truly prosecute the case until they found her. Complicating matters further, it would later come out that an early investigator had mishandled evidence, failing to properly log items and leaving some of them sitting in an office. The case had holes, and everyone working it knew it. As the months turned into years and the leads dried up, the case was handed to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation's cold case team, the unit that inherits the files nobody has been able to close. Investigators kept circling back to Jones because everyone else on that list of 60 had, one by one, been accounted for. The house painter who had called Paige 20 times the day she vanished was confirmed to have been in New Jersey the night her car was set on fire. The other clients who drew attention were checked and cleared. When the crowd that Paige's hidden life had created finally thinned all the way down, the same tall figure was still standing at the end of it. But being the last suspect standing is not the same as being chargeable. And for the better part of 7 years, the investigators lived inside that gap. The case became a fixture of national television long before it was ever resolved. In 2008, CBS aired a segment on it called The Secret Life of Paige Birgfeld. Documentary crews came and went. And through all of it, the answer to the one question that mattered, where Paige actually was, stayed buried somewhere out beyond the edge of town. The person who refused to let the case die was Paige's father. Frank Birgfeld never stopped searching for his daughter. He organized efforts to look for her. He pushed on an investigation he feared had stalled, driven by the knowledge that so many cases like hers are simply never solved, that they appear in the paper once and are never heard about again. The investigators did not blame him for the pressure. Rubenstein said openly that the family's frustration was completely understandable. Frank Birgfeld had watched his daughter vanish, learned the most private details of her life alongside the rest of the country, and been told, year after year, that the man everyone believed had done it could not yet be touched. So for years, nothing moved. Lester Jones went on with his life. Paige's family went on without her, not knowing where she was. That changed on March 6, 2012, almost 5 years after Paige vanished. Hikers moving through a dry gulch called Wells Gulch in Delta County, roughly 30 miles southeast of Grand Junction, along the Highway 50 corridor, came across skeletal remains. Dental records confirmed what investigators had feared for half a decade. It was Paige Birgfeld. By then, the remains were skeletal, which meant the medical examiner could not determine how she had died. To this day, the cause of death is officially unknown. But among the remains, investigators found something that answered a different question. There was duct tape around her skull and her jaw. To the prosecutors and the police, that single detail settled the nature of the crime. This was not a woman who had wandered off or met an accidental end. Paige Birgfeld had been bound. She had been kidnapped. She had been murdered. The location mattered too. Wells Gulch sat out along the same Highway 50 corridor where, 5 years earlier, that trail of torn checks and scattered cards had been found. The breadcrumbs and the body pointed the same direction, down the same road out of town, and that geographic consistency reinforced the theory investigators had held almost from the beginning. Finding her also did something for the case that years of investigation had not been able to do. As Rubenstein put it, once you have found the body, you have taken away one of the most important sources of reasonable doubt a defense can use. For years, the absence of Paige herself had been the single largest hole in the case. Now that hole was closed. Investigators went back over their evidence, retracing the timeline with the confirmation of a homicide behind them, and were able to establish, among other things, that Jones had lied about buying the prepaid phone, the track phone whose entire brief existence had revolved around Paige. In November of 2014, more than 7 years after Paige disappeared, Lester Ralph Jones was arrested and charged with kidnapping, first-degree murder, felony murder, and second-degree murder. At his bond hearing, prosecutors laid out his history of taking women by force, recounting the 1999 attack on his former wife, to argue that he was a flight risk. A judge set his bond at $2 million. Jones said almost nothing, other than to acknowledge his rights. The arson charge that prosecutors had originally hoped to bring over the burning of Paige's car had to be dropped, because the statute of limitations on it had already expired, a small measure of how long this case had been allowed to run before it reached a courtroom. Even with a body, even with the track phone, even with the dogs in the seat and the record, convicting Lester Jones was not simple. It took 2 trials. The first began in the summer of 2016 and ran for 6 weeks. Prosecutors called around 80 witnesses. Among them was Jones's former wife, Lisa Nance, the prosecution's star witness, who testified about the night in the late 1990s when he had kidnapped her at gunpoint and threatened to kill her. Among them, too, were Paige's mother, her father, and her daughter Jess, who by then was 17 years old, testifying about the mother who had vanished when she was 8. The defense pushed hard on the one real weakness of the case, which was the crowd Paige's hidden life had created. Jones's attorneys named 5 alternate suspects and argued that these were men the sheriff's department had let slip through its fingers while it fixated on their client. One former client, they noted, had been waiting in a hotel room for Paige the night she vanished. Another had once joked, they said, about how he would have disposed of her body. The defense attacked the reliability of the cadaver dogs. It highlighted the mishandled evidence. It reminded the jury, again and again, that everything against Jones was circumstantial. It worked, at least enough. After 3.5 days of deliberation, the jury deadlocked. By the accounts that later emerged, every member believed Jones was guilty of something, but several could not get past reasonable doubt on the specific charges. The judge declared a mistrial. One of the jurors approached Paige's family afterward to apologize. She told them she had seen their agony during the trial, that they had wanted this, and that she was sorry. The second trial came just months later, at the end of 2016. It carried its own moment of raw feeling. As one of Paige's friends, Carol Linderholm, passed Jones in the courtroom, she called him a piece of crap killer. The judge found her in contempt. The jurors said they had not heard the outburst, and the trial went on. This time, after 3 days of deliberation broken up by the Christmas holiday, the jury came back. On December 27, 2016, they found Lester Ralph Jones guilty of first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and second-degree kidnapping. Both sides agreed to proceed straight to sentencing, rather than wait. After brief discussion on the record, the judge sentenced Jones to life in prison, without the possibility of parole, with an additional 12 years for the kidnapping to run alongside it. As his wife had taken the stand in his defense earlier, Jones had mouthed 3 words to her across the courtroom. "It wasn't me." The jury had decided otherwise, nearly 9.5 years after an 8-year-old walked into a sheriff's office to report her mother missing. The case finally had a verdict. The Mesa County Sheriff's Office issued a short statement afterward, acknowledging that the verdict would not bring Paige back to her family, but expressing hope that it would at least give them closure. Frank Birgfeld, who had promised after the first trial that there would be a resolution one way or another, had been proven right, though the resolution brought him, by his own quiet account in the days that followed, only a limited kind of comfort. Jones appealed. In June of 2022, the Colorado Court of Appeals upheld his murder conviction. It did vacate part of the verdict on a technical ground, merging the second-degree kidnapping count into the felony murder count because proving the murder had required proving the kidnapping. That merger changed nothing about his sentence. Lester Ralph Jones, now in his 70s, remains at the Fremont Correctional Facility in Canyon City, Colorado, serving life without parole. He has never explained himself. Through 2 trials, an arrest and a conviction, he never offered a motive, never gave an account of what happened in the hours after that last call to the Carrie phone at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night. The people who prosecuted him believe he took Paige, bound her, killed her, drove her body down Highway 50 to that gulch, drove her car back toward town, and set it on fire across the street from where he worked. What he was thinking, why he did it, whether some collision between the fact that he knew her real name and the fact that she had tried to avoid him played any part, he has kept to himself. Paige's father, Frank Birgfeld, who had never stopped searching for his daughter and never stopped pushing a stalled investigation forward, had said even after the first trial's mistrial that there would, one way or another, be a resolution. There was. After the conviction, the Mesa County Sheriff's Office acknowledged what everyone already knew, that no verdict would bring Paige back to her family, but expressed hope that it would at least give them somewhere to stand. For 9 years, this was told to the country as the story of a secret life. That framing is where I want to end, because I think it has always been pointed at the wrong person. Paige Birgfeld did keep a secret. The secret was a job. It was discreet. It was compartmentalized. And it was, by every honest measure, a thing she did to keep 3 children fed and housed after 2 marriages ended and left her largely on her own. That secret has been treated, in documentary after documentary, as the dark truth at the center of the case, the hidden self beneath the soccer mom. It never was. The secret that actually mattered in this case, the one that could have changed everything, belonged to Lester Jones. He was the one leading a genuine double life, the likable mechanic on the surface and, underneath, a man who had already forced one woman off the road at gunpoint and been accused of abducting another. His secret was not hidden in a private phone or a set of websites. It was written down, in open court records, years before he ever dialed Paige's number, and he was free, and employed, and standing across the street. The double life that fascinated the country was never the mystery. The mystery was only ever how the man with the real hidden history ended up close enough to reach her. If you want true crime told this way, with the person kept at the center and the record kept straight, subscribing is what tells the algorithm to carry the next one to the next person who needs it. It costs you nothing and it takes a second. Paige Meredith Birgfeld was 34 years old. She was born in Atlanta in the spring of 1973. She raised 3 children largely alone and ran 4 businesses to do it. And she was, by the accounts of everyone who actually knew her, stubborn and warm and relentlessly capable. In what may have been the last minutes of her life, she appears to have stayed calm enough to tear pieces of herself loose and drop them out a window, one at a time, along 30 miles of highway, trying to leave a path back to the truth for anyone willing to follow it. Her children answered her the way children do, with voicemails asking her to come home. This is one more voice answering, all these years later, with the only name that ever mattered, not Carrie, Paige.